bragged about my ex's success to make him jealous. He responded by destroying my reputation. Okay, I don't even know why I'm doing this. I don't really know, to be honest. I think I'm just trying to make sense of all the chaos in my head, but there's no way to put it all into words. I guess I just need somewhere to unload, somewhere that's not going to judge me or make me feel worse than I already do. I'm still in so much shock, still feeling all this hurt that I can't seem to shake off. Everything's been moving too fast, and it feels like I'm stuck in some kind of emotional freefall, just trying to catch my breath, but I can't. It's like I can't even breathe without feeling that weight on my chest. I guess I should start by admitting something up front. I was just trying to be petty, but at the time I thought I was being clever, like really clever. Maybe even empowering in some twisted way. Looking back though, it's pretty clear that I wasn't being clever or empowering. I was just a dumbass lighting a match while sitting on a pile of gasoline. And now here I am, trying to pick up the pieces of the mess I made. My ex and I dated for more than a year. Let's call him Josh. Josh is an amazing person, sweet, funny, thoughtful. I loved him honestly. But, and there's always a but, isn't there? I still had this lingering ghost in the back of my mind. My ex, Daniel. Daniel and I broke up more than 2 years ago, but it still feels like yesterday sometimes. Our relationship didn't end with some explosive, dramatic moment. There wasn't any cheating, no screaming matches in public, no plates thrown across the room. Instead, it was one of those slow burn breakups. You know the type, where the tiny resentments and little frustrations pile up, one after the other, until the weight is unbearable. And then, finally, someone snaps. In our case, it was Daniel. He sat me down one night and said he needed space. Space to figure himself out, space to focus on his career, space to plan his future. I'll be honest, it stung like hell. I remember sitting there trying not to cry, thinking, what does that even mean? It felt like he was choosing success over me, as if I was some obstacle in his path instead of the person walking it with him. Fast forward a couple more months, and guess what? He was thriving. He got that space he wanted, and boy, did he make the most of it. Through mutual friends, and okay, a little bit of Instagram stalking, don't judge me, I found out that Daniel had landed a massive promotion at work. The kind of promotion that comes with a shiny new title and an even shinier paycheck. He'd moved into this gorgeous apartment. Oh, and to top it all off, he'd bought himself a brand new car. Meanwhile, there I was, still stuck in the same job I'd been working for the last few years, still trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. It was like he'd hit the fast-forward button on his life, and I was stuck on pause. You'd think all of that would have been enough for me to finally let him go, right? Wrong. Instead of moving on, I did the opposite. I let the bitterness fester. Every time I heard about his success or saw a picture of him looking happy, it was like a dagger to the chest. Instead of feeling happy for him or even neutral, I just felt resentful. And that's where the trouble really began. Because instead of facing those feelings and dealing with them like a rational adult, I decided to channel them into something petty, something stupid, something I thought would make me feel better, but instead just blew up in my face. I'd scroll through his Instagram late at night, convincing myself it was no big deal. It's not stalking, it's just checking in, I told myself, as if that made it any less pathetic. Seeing his new life unfold on my screen didn't make me feel better, though. If anything, it made me feel worse. And then there was the jealousy. Oh, the jealousy. It wasn't just about the life he was living. It was about the fact that he seemed so content without me. I started to resent my boyfriend for things he couldn't even control, which, looking back, is so unfair it almost makes me cringe. But at the time, it felt like the easiest thing to do. Redirect all the frustration and bitterness I had bottled up toward him. He was the closest person to me, so of course he became the easiest target. It started small, almost unnoticeable. I'd catch myself thinking, why hasn't he gotten a promotion yet? Or why is he still in the same position at work after all this time? It wasn't like I had a valid reason to expect him to move up the corporate ladder overnight, but my twisted, bitter mind needed someone to blame. Since I wasn't ready to point the finger at myself, he became the default. The rational side of me knew that promotions aren't just handed out like candy, that they depend on timing, opportunity, and a million other things that aren't always in a person's control. But the irrational side of me didn't care. I needed a scapegoat, and unfortunately my boyfriend was right there. I started nitpicking everything about his job. If he mentioned a frustrating day at work, instead of being supportive, I'd ask questions like, well, did you talk to your boss about moving up? Did you apply for any new positions? It wasn't genuine curiosity, it was veiled criticism. I wanted him to do more, even though he was already doing plenty. The worst part? He had no idea where this was coming from. He thought I was being helpful or trying to encourage him, but in reality, I was projecting all my unresolved feelings onto him. I wasn't mad at him, I was mad at myself. Mad that I was stuck, mad that I wasn't thriving like Daniel, mad that my life didn't look like the picture-perfect fantasy I'd imagined. I began to resent the fact that he wasn't thriving in the way Daniel seemed to be. It was like I was holding him to some impossible standard that wasn't even real. Daniel's success wasn't the problem, I was the problem. But admitting that would have meant taking accountability, and I wasn't ready for that. So I let the resentment fester. I'd find myself getting annoyed at the smallest things, like if he came home tired after work and didn't want to talk about career goals, or if he was content just relaxing instead of chasing some imaginary ladder of success I'd set up in my head. I convinced myself that he wasn't trying hard enough, when really he was trying harder than anyone else in the relationship. I needed someone to blame for the mess in my head, and since I couldn't bear to blame myself, I unfairly placed that burden on him. He didn't deserve that. He didn't deserve any of it. And the more I think about it now, the more I realize just how much damage I caused, not just to him, but to the relationship as a whole. I was so wrapped up in my own issues that I couldn't see the amazing person right in front of me, and by the time I did, it was already too late. So I definitely started to talk up my ex way too much, like way too much. It wasn't even subtle. I'd bring him up in random conversations, sometimes out of nowhere, and I'm sure my boyfriend was sitting there thinking, why the hell is she talking about this guy again? Honestly, I don't blame him. If the roles were reversed and he kept bringing up some ex, I would have flipped out, no question. But at the time, I didn't see it that way. Or maybe I didn't want to see it that way. To me, it felt harmless, like, oh, I'm just talking. It doesn't mean anything. Spoiler alert, it definitely meant something. I was talking about Daniel, my ex, like he was this shining example of success and ambition. I was clearly trying to make some kind of point, but at the time, I convinced myself it was innocent. My boyfriend, bless him, tried to handle it as calmly as possible at first. He'd say things like, why do you bring him up so much? Or, do you even realize how often you talk about him? I know he was trying to understand, trying to have a mature conversation about it, but I wasn't in the right headspace to hear him out. Anytime he brought it up, I'd immediately get defensive. I'd hit him with the classic, why are you being so jealous? As if he was the one with the problem. In my head, I wasn't doing anything wrong. I wasn't texting Daniel. I wasn't seeing him. I was just talking. And I'd tell my boyfriend exactly that. It's just talking. It doesn't mean anything. You're overreacting. But let's be real. It wasn't just talking. Constantly bringing up an ex, especially in a way that highlights their accomplishments, isn't normal behavior. I was comparing him to my boyfriend, even if I wasn't outright saying it. And of course, my boyfriend felt insecure about it. Who wouldn't? He tried to explain how it made him feel, but instead of listening, I doubled down. I'd brush him off with, you're making a big deal out of nothing, or, it's not like I'm saying I want to be with him again. But let's be honest, what else was he supposed to think? I was constantly hyping up another guy, someone I had a history with, and then gaslighting him into thinking his feelings were irrational. I see now how shitty that was, but at the time, I was so caught up in my own mess that I couldn't admit I was wrong. The worst part? Deep down, I knew what I was doing. I knew I was bringing up Daniel to make a point, to make my boyfriend feel like he wasn't measuring up. It wasn't fair, and it wasn't right, but I did it anyway. And of course, like any other human being, my words started to get to him. I mean, how could they not? I wasn't exactly being subtle about it. I wanted my boyfriend to be jealous. Honestly, that was the whole point. I thought if he got jealous, it would mean he cared more, or maybe it would spark some kind of reaction in him that would make him try harder, be better, or whatever nonsense I had cooked up in my head at the time. But the thing is, he didn't get jealous. Not in the way I wanted, at least. He didn't sulk or throw a fit or start competing with the ghost of my ex. Instead, he sat me down to have an actual conversation about it numerous times. He told me how my constant comments about Daniel made him feel. He told me it hurt, that it made him feel like he wasn't enough, like he was being compared to someone else every time I opened my mouth about my ex. Did I listen? Nope, not even a little bit. I brushed it off completely. I was so wrapped up in my own pettiness and self-righteousness that I couldn't even acknowledge how valid his feelings were. Instead, I turned it around on him. I told him he was overreacting, that he was being ridiculous and reading too much into it. I even went as far as to say he was just jealous and trying to control me. In my head, that justified everything I was doing. I convinced myself that his feelings were the problem, not my actions. I twisted the narrative to make it seem like he was being possessive or insecure, even though he wasn't doing anything of the sort. Looking back, it's clear I was deflecting. I didn't want to face the fact that I was the one being hurtful, so I made him the bad guy instead. I told myself that I was just being honest, that I wasn't doing anything wrong, and that he was the one making a big deal out of nothing. I knew I was being dismissive and unfair, but I didn't care enough to stop. It's one of those things that's so painfully obvious in hindsight. He wasn't overreacting. He wasn't being jealous or controlling. He was just trying to tell me how much it hurt to constantly hear about another guy, someone who I was supposed to be over, and I didn't give him the respect he deserved. And honestly, I don't blame him for what happened next. I brought it all on myself. The more I talked about my ex, the more vocal my boyfriend became about it. At first, he tried to be calm, bringing it up in a way that wasn't confrontational. But the more I kept bringing Daniel into conversations, comparing him to my boyfriend, dropping little tidbits about Daniel's new life, or straight up praising him, the more my boyfriend started to express how uncomfortable it made him. And every single time I shut him down. It was like a reflex. I'd immediately tell him he was overreacting or that he couldn't take a joke. I told him he was being jealous, and worse, trying to be controlling. That was my ace card, my trump. Anytime I pulled that card, he'd stop. He'd shut down completely, and the conversation would die right there. It became my go-to response, knowing it would silence him. But here's the thing, that wasn't enough for me. I wanted more. I didn't just want him to stop talking. I wanted a reaction. I wanted him to be jealous, extremely jealous. In my twisted logic, jealousy equaled proof of how much he cared. I wanted him to get fired up, maybe even angry. I wanted to see some sort of emotional explosion that would validate me, make me feel important, make me feel like he thought I was worth fighting for. But he never gave me what I wanted. Instead of jealousy or anger, I got hurt. Instead of explosions, I got quiet disappointment. And because I wasn't getting the reaction I thought I deserved, I kept pushing. I doubled down. I talked about Daniel even more, brought him up in places where it wasn't even relevant, and found new ways to weave him into the conversation. It wasn't just a slip of the tongue at that point. It was intentional. I wanted my boyfriend to feel something, to show me that this bothered him. I thought that by poking the bear enough times, eventually it would growl. But all I did was make things worse. And then came the night I really messed up. We were at a group hangout with some mutual friends. The vibe was chill. Drinks, snacks, people catching up on each other's lives. At first it was fine, but then someone brought up Daniel. They mentioned how well he was doing, how his new business was taking off, and that was all the opening I needed. Before I even realized what I was doing, I started bragging about him. I went on and on about his new job, how much money he was making, the fancy car he had just bought, and how he'd completely glowed up since we broke up. I wasn't just adding to the conversation, I was steering it, throwing in every little detail I knew to make Daniel sound as impressive as possible. And yeah, I'll admit it, I kept glancing at Josh while I was talking. I wanted to see some kind of reaction from him. I wanted to see him squirm a little, maybe look uncomfortable or insecure. In my twisted logic, I thought, if he feels a little jealous, it means he cares. But Josh didn't react the way I expected. He didn't argue, didn't snap, didn't even roll his eyes. Instead, he just sat there quiet and stone-faced. After a while, he stood up, said something about needing some air, and walked out. At first, I thought he'd just gone outside for a breather, or maybe stepped out to take a call, But when I went looking for him later, I realized he had actually left the party, just straight up left. We had driven there together, so that meant one thing. He'd taken the car and left me behind. I ended up having to call an Uber to get home, and let me tell you, that ride gave me way too much time to think. Sitting there, staring out the window, I started to replay everything I'd said that night, and for the first time, it hit me just how cruel I'd been. When I finally got home, I walked in and saw Josh passed out in bed. At that point, I didn't even want to deal with anything, so I just climbed in beside him, pulled the blanket up, and laid there in silence. Part of me was still buzzing from the events of the night. I kept wondering if Josh would say something when he woke up. But no, he just stayed asleep. Quiet, calm. The next morning, I woke up and realized what a massive mistake I'd made. I should have apologized right then and there, taken responsibility for what I did, and owned up to the fact that I was being an absolute idiot. But of course I didn't. Instead, I just brushed it off, thinking it would blow over like everything else. I thought, it's just one more argument, he'll get over it. I honestly believed I could just skate by without acknowledging what I did, that he would just get over it like he always did. But that was incredibly stupid of me. I see it now, but at the time I convinced myself that I was doing the right thing by not making a big deal out of it. I thought maybe if I waited long enough, Josh would forget about it or just move on without me having to confront it. He didn't bring it up, didn't complain, didn't make a scene, so I assumed everything was fine, right? Wrong. I seriously misread the whole situation. I guess deep down I thought I could get away with it. I mean, I'd gotten away with this kind of behavior before, so why would this time be any different? Josh wasn't the type to raise his voice or make a dramatic scene, so I figured that because he stayed silent, everything was cool. About a month after that day, something surprising happened. Josh quit his job. I mean, I was totally blindsided. I couldn't even process it at first. Why the hell would he quit? He had been the one holding us together financially, paying the rent, making sure we could eat, covering all the bills. He had been the one keeping everything afloat, so why would he just walk away from it all? At first, I figured maybe he was just fed up. Maybe the job was too much for him. Maybe it was just burnout. That's what I told myself to make sense of it because it seemed so sudden, so out of nowhere. But then, when I asked, I found out that he already had another job lined up. And not just any job. Apparently, it was a way better one. A huge step up from where he was. Honestly, part of me felt relieved. I mean, it was great that he had something better, right? He was going to make more money, have more opportunities. That should have been a good thing. But here's the thing. While part of me was happy for him, there was this other feeling creeping in that I couldn't shake. Everything around me started to feel like it was shifting. And it wasn't just about the job. It was like I was losing him, piece by piece. He had always been the one who supported me, who held things down, and now it felt like he was slowly slipping away. His emotional distance was obvious. He wasn't reaching out to me anymore. He wasn't talking to me like he used to. He wasn't asking about my day or making plans for us. It was like he was becoming a completely different person that I didn't know. I couldn't even explain why it bothered me so much. It wasn't like I wanted him to stay stuck in the same place forever, but the fact that he was making all these moves without me, it was like I was being left behind. The more he focused on his future, the more I felt like I was stuck in the past. I could feel the emotional wall between us getting taller. He was becoming more distant, more independent, and it was like he was building a life that had nothing to do with me. He didn't need me to be his safety net anymore. He didn't need me to be the one to lean on, and that was terrifying. Months after that night, when I had convinced myself that everything had smoothed over, Josh blindsided me. He broke up with me out of nowhere. I was absolutely shocked. I didn't see it coming. Like we hadn't fought. We hadn't even argued. I genuinely thought we were past this whole mess. I thought maybe I had gotten away with it, or maybe he'd just let it slide. But no, he ended things right there, in one swift blow. He told me that he couldn't be with someone who didn't respect him, who constantly looked down on him, and to top it all off, was still so hung up on their ex. He straight up said that if I was still so obsessed with Daniel, I should just go back to him. I couldn't even process the words when he said it. It felt like someone slapped me across the face. He wasn't just mad or upset. He was done. He kicked me out of the house, and that was it. Just like that, I was out on the streets. I was speechless. I couldn't believe it. I didn't have anywhere to go. I was completely on my own. I ended up staying with a mutual friend for a few days, just couch surfing and crying my eyes out. I honestly didn't know what to do. I tried reaching out to Josh, begging for a chance to talk, to fix things. I told him I'd stop talking about Daniel, that I'd make it right. But he wasn't having it. He wasn't interested in fixing things with me. He had made his decision and stuck to it. He blocked me everywhere, phone, social media. I was cut off. I didn't even have a chance to fully process everything before it was all over. I tried talking to our mutual friends, hoping maybe they would help me get through to him. But nope, they didn't want to get involved, and honestly, I didn't blame them. They all knew about the stuff I'd been saying about Daniel. They had noticed how I kept bringing him up, and they told me they supported Josh. They thought he deserved better than me. That hit me hard. Everyone was on his side, and I realized just how much I had messed up. I had ruined what I had with Josh, all for my own petty jealousy. I thought I was being clever or in control, but it turned out I was just pushing him away, and he couldn't take it anymore. All the things I had tried to avoid facing finally came crashing down on me. I couldn't fix it, couldn't change it, and it hurt more than anything. I had lost the person I cared about the most, and it was my own damn fault. I was honestly so fucking depressed. Everything felt like it was falling apart. Yeah, sure, I talked about my ex a lot, but it wasn't because I missed him. It wasn't even because I thought about him all the time. I did it to make Josh jealous, and that was a shitty thing to do. I knew it. I loved Josh. But I was too wrapped up in my own mess to admit it at the time. And the worst part was, I didn't even have time to recover from all the damage I was causing before things got even worse. So of course it happened. I got fired. Out of nowhere, my job just let me go. Apparently there had been complaints, anonymous complaints, and I'm not even going to get into the rumors because they were so fucking nasty. I don't want anyone identifying me from this, and trust me, these rumors were the kind that would destroy anyone. I couldn't believe it. I had no idea where they came from or who was behind it, but they had evidence. Evidence. Yeah, I put that in air quotes because honestly, what the fuck was that supposed to mean? The whole thing was bullshit, but there I was, fired with a measly severance package. I was homeless and jobless at the same time, which let me tell you is not a good combo. During all this chaos, it just seemed like the universe had a laugh at my expense. All my friends started pulling away, even the mutual ones. My one friend said I could crash at their place for 2 more weeks, and then I'd have to go. They didn't want to deal with the rumors, and honestly, I didn't blame them, even though it fucking sucked. But no one believed me when I tried to explain it. No one believed that it wasn't true. My reputation was shot to hell, and I couldn't do anything to fix it. The worst part? I knew who was behind it. I knew deep down it was Josh. I don't have any proof, and I know I never will. That's what eats at me. I couldn't prove it to anyone, and no one wanted to listen. Anytime I tried talking to people, even our mutual friends, they just immediately defended him. They said he'd never do something like that he wasn't capable of it. My reputation was completely destroyed. I couldn't stay in that city anymore. There was nothing left for me. So with nothing but a few belongings I hadn't sold off or pawned, I packed up and moved back to my home state. Back to where my family was. That was a couple of months ago now, and honestly, I'm still not over it. I don't think I ever will be. Even after I left, the shit kept coming. It didn't stop. My emails were getting bombarded with spam. The kind of spam I knew I never signed up for. It wasn't just a few emails here and there. It was nonstop. I started getting random phone calls about things I didn't understand. Ads I never put up, things I never even heard of. How the hell was that even possible? It got so bad that I had to change my phone number 3 times, and I had to open and delete a ridiculous amount of new Gmail accounts. It's like someone had my shit on some list, just passing it around, leaking my information everywhere. It was traumatic as hell, and I'm still dealing with the fallout from it. The constant worry that my privacy was violated in some way I couldn't fix. The anxiety that never really left. What makes this whole situation even worse, if you can imagine that, is the fact that while I was literally going through all this shit, Josh was out here living his life like nothing ever happened. He got a new house, got a new car, and was just out there driving around doing his thing. Meanwhile, I was stuck in this spiral, unable to figure out what the hell had happened to everything I thought I had. I couldn't help but feel like the universe was just kicking me while I was down, like he was driving around in his new car while I was scraping by. But here's the part that really fucking messed with me. Somehow, out of nowhere, he and my other ex, yeah, the one I'd been talking about to make Josh jealous, became friends. Like, what the actual fuck? I can't even make this shit up. So, I'm not proud to admit it, but I started stalking his social media, Josh's. Yeah, I said it. I know it's pathetic, but I just couldn't help myself. I needed to know what was going on. And after a couple of weeks of me moving back in with my parents and trying to put some pieces of my life together, I started seeing photos of Josh with my other ex. It wasn't just a one-time thing. It was like they were hanging out all the time. They were posting pictures together, and when I went to check my ex's social media, it was the same thing. They were friends now. How the hell did that even happen? It felt like a slap in the face. And now, I can't help but regret everything. I know it was my fault. All of it. I fucked up. I miss Josh so much. But I have no idea why I'm even admitting this. Maybe I just need to rant, unload, because if I say it out loud, maybe it will feel like a little bit of the weight will lift off my chest. It's crazy, though. Even when I try to tell people what happened, especially my parents, they don't believe me. They don't think Josh would ever do something like that, like spreading rumors about me and damaging my reputation. But who else could it have been? I'm 99% sure it was him. It just makes sense. No one else had that kind of access to my life or my circle. But of course, Josh is this perfect, kind, thoughtful guy in everyone's eyes, so no one would ever believe he would be the one to do something like that. Honestly, I can't even blame him for what happened. It's all on me. I was so fucking horrible to him. I took him for granted. I was petty, childish, and selfish. If I were him, I probably would have done the same damn thing. I don't even know why I'm talking about this here, honestly. Maybe I'm just trying to convince myself that I'm not crazy for thinking it was him. I regret everything. I wish I could go back and fix it, but I can't. I fucked up in ways I'll never be able to undo, and I don't think I'll ever forgive myself for what I did. I'm still messed up from it all. I can't stop thinking about how I got here. The whole thing feels like a nightmare I can't wake up from. I'm depressed. I'm stuck in my own head, and I can't shake the feeling that it's never going to get better.